The weekly Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by SurfWatch Labs. SurfWatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on. Hey everybody out there, today is May 8th, 2015. I am Jeff Peters, HackSurfer Editor. I'm here with Matt Leifus, HackSurfer Writer, and Michael Fell, SurfWatch Labs Data Analyst. A little bit later, we have an interview with David Bryson. He's the Chief Legal Officer for Endurance International Group. And today marks the end of National Small Business Week, and they did a survey on small business cybersecurity, so we chatted about that survey and what small business owners think about cybersecurity. So yeah, I'll throw it over to you, Matt, for the top cyber headlines of the week.
Yeah, and I'll go down through the top three. So coming in at number 3 this week, we had Partners Healthcare. This is a Boston-based healthcare system, and this week they notified more than 3,300 patients of a potential data breach. The company learned that back in November of 2014, there was a attack via phishing emails against some of their employees who fell victim to it, and they disclosed a lot of information on a lot of patients. Some of this information included names, addresses, birth dates, social security numbers, things like that. However, the company is saying that there is no evidence of any of this information being used maliciously at this time. Coming in number 2, we have the University of California, Berkeley. Officials at the university informed several people on April 30th about a data breach that was discovered on March 14th. Hackers were able to access a web server maintained by the university's Division of Equity and Inclusion. Information included family financial information such as social security numbers and bank account information. In the attack, 260 undergrads were potentially compromised, as well as 290 parents of students were also affected. And coming on at number 1 this week, we have the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. They were a victim of a credit card breach. The company has yet to disclose any information about the breach, so we don't know how it happened or what exactly was affected other than it was credit cards. I think naturally when we talk about this, you're probably thinking point of sale, obviously. The breach started September 2014 and lasted through April 2015. And those are the top new trending targets for the week.
So one of the big stories out there that I saw was Onapsis Research Labs. They put out a new study, and the study indicated that over 95% of SAP applications were exposed to vulnerabilities that could lead to full compromise of an organization's business, data, and processes. So that was kind of a big story. SurfWatch Labs put out an alert on it, just saying that the impact was that vulnerable SAP applications could compromise many different kinds of data, including intellectual property, financial information, credit card numbers, customer and supplier data, etc. And they said that many organizations have a patch time of as long as 18 months for SAP products. But in the past year, over 30 patches were released per month, with over half of them being marked as high priority. So obviously there's a big difference between the time where they should be installing these patches and actually doing it. With 18 months, it's a pretty long time to leave a vulnerability out there.
And to add, a study also recommended that organizations should keep up to date with their SAP security notes. It's connected to patching, continually monitor their networks, and have both security protection and risk management policies in place for the worst case scenarios.
So that was one big study. There was also another study that came out this week, which I thought was pretty interesting because it kind of tied into our discussion we were having last week. The Ponemon Institute put out their 5th annual benchmark study on privacy and security of healthcare data, and they found that criminal attacks in healthcare are up 125% since 2010. And just last week on the podcast, we were talking about there's several different phishing attacks and that had led to breaches. I popped into SurfWatch Labs data this morning just to see if our data aligned with this study, and it did. We talk a lot about physical theft being a problem in healthcare, but that was actually the third highest trending tag of the year of 2015, and phishing was actually more prevalent, and network security breach was by far the number one. I guess SurfWatch Labs data lines up with this Ponemon study that there's a lot more criminal activity going on in the healthcare sector over the past couple of years.
And Jeff, starting maybe 2014, we've started to really notice, the analysts, SurfWatch Labs analysts have really started to notice that shift. And I feel like with the compromise of the healthcare data from Anthem, just as one example, I think a lot of criminals are starting to see the value that this data brings for their illegal activities, whether it's selling them on the underground to carters or other types of folks. I think it's very lucrative for criminals to sell this sort of information, and you'll continue to see that increase.
So the first week of every month, SurfWatch Labs puts out all their industry risk report cards, and I know, Matt, you've been posting quite a few of them on HackSurfer. So I was just looking at some of the data in there, and I thought it kind of surprised me because I was looking at the total number of industry targets. The last couple months in February and in March, there was about a low 500 for the total number of industry targets discussed like in relation to cybercrime. But in April, that number jumped all the way up to 733. So part of that might have been because a lot of the hacktivist activity and stuff, which we talked about previously, there's a lot of that in April. But I thought that was a pretty big jump. And then two industry sectors in particular saw increased risk compared to their 6 months average risk. Other organizations, which includes like universities, nonprofits, things like that, they had the worst risk grade of the month. They got a D+. And financials was the other sector that had increased risk compared to sort of the average over the past couple months. Did anything stand out to you, Matt, when you were posting about these different grades?
Well, it wasn't all bad news this month. We did see a significant increase in the amount of total industry targets that appeared, but a lot of the other report cards, not that it was like, some amazing thing, cybercrime is still here, of course, but there were a lot of report cards that actually showed either a slight decrease in risk, or you had the entertainment sector that actually received an A this month on their report card, which shows a significant decrease in risk. The one thing that did stand out to me, a lot of websites being targeted this month. A lot of sectors actually saw this. It was one of the top targets. That's really what stood out to me, on top of, like you said, with the increase of the total industry targets compared to the previous months.
Yeah, and I think that was probably tied to, I'm just speculating here, but probably tied to the increase in hacktivist activity. It just seemed like we saw a lot of stories like that in April.
Like Op Israel, for instance, and Anonymous was in April. And
yeah, plus there's a lot of ISIS, sort of ISIS group-related attacks.
Yeah, in the information technology sector in particular, there are a lot of social media accounts were compromised because of Op Israel. So that had a significant effect on the IT sector.
For those people who are subscribers to SurfWatch Labs, their monthly report will be coming out here beginning of the next week, kind of summing up and all the different industry sectors and drawing some conclusions for that for businesses. Any other big stories from the past week that stood out to you guys?
One that stood out to me, this is a story that has been coming up. It comes up in spots, and I'm talking about Uber. It really kind of started back in March of 2014. There were initial reports of Uber accounts being sold on underground markets for like $1. I mean, it wasn't much, but there was an initial report. Uber denied that they had been breached. Well, since that time, there has been more, people are complaining that, hey, I have these fraudulent charges, and these stories keep popping up, and Uber throughout the entire time has denied. They're saying, look, that we haven't been breached. Take a look at the passwords and usernames that you guys are using, because if you're using weak passwords and usernames, you could be getting compromised just from that. Well, now, this week, we had another story. This time it was fraudulent charges appearing in the U.S. There are several people. One gal by the name of Stephanie Crisco actually tweeted the list of charges. There were like 8 separate things, and they were all canceled that came from the Uber account. But there was clearly fraudulent activity. But again, Uber has maintained, and they're being adamant that, look, guys, we're doing the research. There has not been a data breach, and they keep recommending using strong usernames and passwords and kind of really saying that's more the reason why this is happening. It kind of reminds me of when we had the celebrity nude photo scandal not long ago. There was a lot of news like, oh, hey, Apple, this is your fault and all this happened. And they were also saying like, look, this is a case of weak passwords, weak usernames. So don't really 100% sure, for sure know what's going on. Obviously, none of us are a part of Uber, so we weren't, there investigating or anything like that. But it's a story that just kind of it doesn't die. It just keeps popping up throughout the year so far.
As a user of Uber, it's concerning, but I think if accounts are being compromised for whatever reason, it could be because, again, people aren't using proper username and passwords. They're using the same thing across a bunch of accounts. So that's a possibility. But it's interesting that Uber's kind of, I feel like, trying to get ahead of the issue. They just hired, I believe it was a month or two ago, a chief security officer. So they're probably going to try to improve their security stature.
Yeah, so moving on to our cyber tip of the week, being National Small Business Week, there's been a lot of companies and articles putting out small business cybersecurity tips. And National Cybersecurity Institute.org, they put out a list of 10 cyber threats small businesses should prepare for in 2015. A lot of them are pretty basic, like ransomware, social engineering, Internet of Things. One that stood out to me that doesn't get talked about a lot is weak passwords and the flawed password retrieval process. They say that if you're going to allow customers or vendors to access confidential information on your system via password, to make sure that your password reset process is secure and complex. For a lot of companies, the traditional questions for reset are too easy to hack. They just advise that you should review your password reset procedure to see if the process is complex enough, and that two-level authentication is better than just answering a basic personal question and providing a user email address. So that is the cyber tip of the week. Coming up, we have our interview with David Bryson. He's the Chief Legal Officer of Endurance International Group, and we talk about that small business cybersecurity survey that they did. So recently you guys surveyed more than 1,000 small businesses, and you found that 81% of small business owners believe that cybersecurity is a concern, and 94% stated that they frequently or occasionally think about cybersecurity issues. I mean, I was just surprised that the numbers were so high for those two categories. Just curious your thoughts, if you were surprised as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Well, at Endurance, we have more than 4 million websites that we host. And with so many small businesses, what we find is that some of them are more sophisticated about doing business online with others. For example, we may have bloggers or web designers or folks who resell our services to their own customers. And those folks tend to be very sophisticated about online business, online security, and take the benefit of the various tools and services that we have available to them to protect their accounts and their customers' accounts. But then we have lots of others who are like, traditional brick and mortar businesses. Like I live in Boston, so we have friends who are Caribbean caterer, a local coffee shop, a bead and fiber shop in Boston's SoA district, a pizza shop in the North End, and those folks are less tech savvy oftentimes, so they need to pay attention, and oftentimes it comes down to the basics. How do they protect, the same way that you would want to protect your Facebook account or your Twitter account? You don't want someone else taking over that account through sloppy password hygiene and becoming you on your Facebook account, right? So that's a core part of this. But another part of this is the cyber criminals out there, and we can talk about spear phishing and some of those things as well if you'd like.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask about if you guys had any tips or advice for small businesses, because I also saw in there it said 83% of small business owners are basically going it alone. They don't really have any support or utilize any outside tools. For those 83% who are doing it themselves, is there any good advice you can give them for how to stay secure?
when you think about a small business, it's not like they have their own tech crew, right? They're not big businesses. They're small businesses. So oftentimes it's the entrepreneur, the person running the coffee shop who's also paying attention to their website or their web presence. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, for me, when I talk to small businesses, it's all about the basics. Take care of your laptop. Take care of your cell phone. If you've got a domain name, register it in a way so that you get the renewal notices. Manage your email account, your hosting account carefully. Be careful about your apps. You see a lot of people moving to two-step security these days where, if they forget their password, they can get an email to the email address online, but maybe they can get a text to their cell phone too, which provides additional security, and we recommend that to customers as well. This area of cyber criminals and spear phishing is really something for people to be aware of. We hear stories about criminal states attacking, pretending, setting up totally fake Twitter accounts and pretending, to become, quote, friends or be linked with others on LinkedIn. And you can sort of gather a little energy around that, these criminals do. And so you don't want, if you're running a small business, you don't want to be, linking to people that you don't know. You need to be careful about that.
You mentioned that you guys work with a lot of different small businesses, so you kind of brought up a little bit of phishing and spear phishing, but I'm wondering if there's any, kind of common thread of different issues that maybe your customers would face in regards to cybersecurity.
Yeah, so, I'm sort of an old dude. I've been around practicing law for a long time. I've been with Endurance. I think I first started here in 2000. And when I was growing up, we had a railroad station that went through our town. And we had a sign that said, stop, look, and listen. And that's really what, if you get an email that wants you to reply and says, your bank wants you to reset your password, be very careful. Stop, look, and listen. So don't just click on any link because, with the spear phishing, it's a term that people may not be familiar with, but there's malware embedded by the cyber criminal in these links. So, they may send you a Word doc or a PDF, and the unsuspecting individual, you or me, you may click on that. And when it does, it embeds some malware in your computer. And suddenly, the cyber criminal has control over your laptop or your iPhone or your tablet, and you don't. And that's not good because obviously they can then go on to steal your data, take over your accounts. So that it's some of that stuff that's very basic. And I noted we raised in the survey whether people maintain insurance, and frankly, insurance is still maturing in this area. Most small businesses don't really have a bunch of resources to spend money on things like insurance. It's sort of the last thing that they worry about. But there's not like a car insurance or a homeowner's insurance that's readily available, fully understood, reasonable cost, reasonable coverage. If I crash my car, I know I'm going to get I'll pay the deductible and they'll cover the rest, and that feels pretty good. So cyber insurance is something that is probably coming along. I think I'm sure it exists for larger businesses today, but the deductibles are huge and the exclusions seem to be even bigger. So it doesn't really seem like the immediate solution for small businesses. It has a lot more to do with how people manage their accounts and again, be careful about things like spear phishing.
Yeah, I guess one other question that you guys asked was about, if the federal government needs to be more involved. And I believe it was something like 70% of small business owners agreed that the federal government needs to do more to help defend against cyber attacks. So, I kind of get where they're coming from, but I'm wondering, going to the more specific level, is there anything specific that the government can do to help small businesses that you guys would recommend or be in favor of?
Yeah, I think first of all, everybody needs to manage their own risk. So I don't look to the federal government to manage the risk for us. On the other hand, I do think that the federal government is already doing quite a bit. They've for more than a decade been focused on its cyber infrastructure and cyber risk issues. But I think it's sort of continuous improvement. There's the cyber criminals are out there every day trying to think up new ways to attack and take down servers or to, infiltrate people's accounts and going after larger companies, et cetera. So I do know that the federal law enforcement does quite a bit on this already, but, there's always more that can be done. The way I think about it, it's, it sort of takes a village to raise a child, and it takes lots of different, companies need to do a lot. The internet infrastructure needs to continue to work on this, and it's really the risk because of, when we talk about spear phishing, there's a lot of training involved. If you run a coffee shop and if you get 3 people working on your website and one of them, goofs up on their spear phishing, you got a problem. So there's both macro and micro things that need to take place. But certainly support Congress continuing to work on this, the administration, et cetera.
I don't know if you've been following like all the different bills in Congress, but I think there's like 5 different ones. Have you been following those at all, like the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act or anything? Yeah,
I know there's, for example, one that you might be thinking of, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Bill, the PCNA, to Protect Cyber Networks Act. And I think what companies, whether data center providers or web hosts or whatever, they get attacked every day, and they would love to have a vehicle, sort of a central clearinghouse, where they could send anonymized attack data and share, and it have to be sort of real time. And so that, setting up something like that is certainly an area where government could help, Congress could help pass a bill like that. And that would allow, for example, if we got attacked by some cyber criminal, from the other side of the world, and we were able to get the attack data up there and then the next, our competitor or some other online party was able to see that and work, just take notice of that and block, oftentimes it's a case of blocking IP addresses. So they could block the IP address. That'd be a good thing to do.
Getting back to just kind of like what small businesses can do, I guess the one thing that I always see a lot of, like recently we've seen a lot of sort of like website defacements by like ISIS supporting groups. But it always seems to be sort of like the low-hanging fruit they go after, people who like don't update their sites and are vulnerable. I guess I'm just wondering if you'd agree that that's sort of the main thing, is just kind of making sure you're not among sort of the low-hanging fruit out there, so you're not as easy of a target.
Yeah, like as I mentioned, Jeff, I totally agree with that. We host lots of different websites. Sometimes we help customers build them. Sometimes they build them themselves. We have tools that people can use to build their websites. Sometimes they'll have their own web designer build them, and sometimes the code that the customer or their web designer uses, really isn't good stuff, and it's weak and it's got vulnerabilities, and that's what the cyber criminals can attack. And if they get malware in there in the customer, they can do stuff with that customer account. So we offer tools available, security services available to help customers with their account. We certainly recommend those. Another area that we didn't really touch on yet is, if you're a small business and you're taking credit card information from your customers, you need to be really careful. We've all seen the huge problems with Target and others where they lost millions of customer credit card information. So what I always say is, less is more in this area. If you're a credit card small business taking credit card numbers, maybe you can have your merchant credit card provider take the number for you, because if you don't collect that data, you don't need to protect that data. It's as simple as that. So the first thing you want to think about if you're doing online business is, what information am I collecting from my customers, and how do I protect that? And if you can have your merchant provider, and we've got merchant services that we offer to our customers from third parties, why not have the third party? Because they've got the scale to really protect that stuff. And if you're just a local coffee shop going online, you really, what do you know about credit cards? You're trying to make coffee.
That's pretty much all the questions that I have, unless there's any other thoughts you have on kind of small business security as we wrap up Small Business Week.
Yeah, no, it's, we're very excited. We think this is a very dynamic area. We think there's more and more businesses going online, and, we just love to do whatever we can do to provide services to help our customers. And, if if it's giving them a heads up or a tool or service that will help them improve their online security, we're happy to do it. That's what we're here for, and that's been, when our CEO spoke to me 3 or 4 years ago, Jane and I met with him to talk about our goals for 2012, and we're just a couple of lawyers trying to help the company out, and he said, hey, and this is Hari Ravichandran, our CEO, and he said, hey, Dave, why don't you try and provide your services in a way that helps make the web a better place for our customers and employees? So things like helping customers with cybersecurity is exactly the kind of thing that sort of gets us up in the morning and charged up about getting in here and helping out our fellow employees and our customers. So thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure, and happy to talk about these or other issues affecting our SMBs anytime.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, David. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's Cybercrime and Business Podcast. As always, you can follow us on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you listen. And for more information, check out SurfWatchLabs.com.